we pay a price internationally. Ira, do you have any thoughts on the democracy?
Well, first, I would say to the audience that Bruce has written an excellent article on this in Foreign Affairs, discussing the deterioration of America as an example and our inability on soft power. We're undermining it because we don't look like a democracy. The second point is that I think Bill has made a crucial point in his work. The people who know better and stay silent have been a real problem here. And if you go back, and by that I mean the McConnells and other Senate Republicans who for instance, knew that the 2020 election was conducted fairly, but refused to recognize Biden as the president-elect for weeks. And if you go back and look at it, the period of time after the election and for 5 weeks after that, when the Republicans, for the most part, did not acknowledge Biden as the president-elect, that was when the big lies spread. And 50 million Republicans, 70% of the Trump vote, reached the conclusion that the election was stolen and rigged because nobody was telling them otherwise who they believed. So it's a lesson, and unfortunately, it's a lesson that people haven't learned, that the people who have these positions of influence and know better and stay silent are a real problem. And they've aided and abetted in that regard the extreme elements. They wouldn't say they're extremists, but they've let the extremists run wild.
Can I have one?
Go ahead, Jessica. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think a key part of the deterioration that we are seeing is the fact that primaries are producing more extreme nominees, and so that's your motivation to not work across the aisle, because these are decided in primaries by such a small part of the electorate. And then we've seen candidates that, have tried to pivot toward the center after winning, and whether that's be successful, we'll see. But I think some of the places where I'm really intrigued, because we are seeing some election administration changes really in how this are decided, or states that now have ranked choice voting. Maine, that is only at the federal level. It's not going to be at the governor's race. And then Alaska just implemented this top 4 primary system where the top 4 candidates, regardless of party, advance. And then it's ranked choice voting. And that special House election we had for the Alaska House seat, that produced a more moderate nominee, or a more moderate winner, in Democrat Mary Patola over Sarah Palin, who probably even our foreign audiences has heard of. And Lisa Murkowski is the only senator up for re-election this cycle who voted to convict President Trump in his second impeachment trial. In a traditional primary, she would have lost. In fact, she has lost in a primary before and then came back with a write-in campaign. But because of the ranked choice voting, she will get enough, at least second place Democrats. She gets a lot of her support from independents and Democrats already, not just Republicans. But her Trump-backed primary challenger is not going to win because of the way that is set up. Nevada is also looking at setting this up. So that's a key part to me, if sort of moving away from maybe the traditional primary cycle and having people weigh in on, you have an array of candidates that can advance, and then to get to a majority of the vote with ranked choice.
I mean, I can add one point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another slightly optimistic point, sort of like Jessica's, but on the foreign policy side. I mean, I would say, on the sort of upside of U.S. power and soft power, I mean, if you had told me after the chaos of the November 2020 to January 6, 2021, that the attacks on Biden, his taking over with 50-50 Senate and tiny majority in the House, that he would have been able to conduct, and then I think Afghanistan, which I think was a mistake, whether it was a mistake or not, certainly hurt him politically and lessened his power, you might say, to convince people. If you had told me we could pull off the Ukraine foreign policy we pulled off over the last 8 months with good U.S. work, good diplomatic work, and solidifying the alliance, and we don't deserve by any means all or perhaps most of the credit for it. A lot of other countries did a lot of work, but we were key to it, obviously, and Ukrainians think we're key to it, and the Europeans think we're to it. But I ultimately, obviously, if this goes on too long in the U.S., it really, really weakens us. But it is a little bit of a, I mean, Ukraine war is terrible in so many ways in terms of the humanitarian and other factors. But in terms of strengthening, in a way, the liberal world order and the U.S. role in it, I'm a little struck by that.
Now, we got a number of questions from the audience, so I'd like to turn to that if we can. Our first question was really a foreign policy and foreign trade really related question. Anybody has a view on this about whether the impact of this election, the change in power possibly in the Congress, will in fact impact trade relations with Europe. This is from someone from Digital Europe. There are a number of trade-related issues that are beginning to build with Europe, but trade is not a major issue in this campaign by a long shot. Do anybody have any thoughts on that before we move to the next question? Ira, you used to be a trade lawyer.
Ira, you worked there. You go for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a way former U.S. trade official, but I try to keep up on these issues. From my standpoint, there is more of a consensus in trade now than there has been in a long time. And the consensus in trade that exists is, number one, we really needed a North American free trade agreement, notwithstanding how much people disliked NAFTA. And so they updated it. And number two, there's a bipartisan agreement that our trade policy with China and our policy toward China generally had to be much tougher. So those are the elements of a consensus on trade in the United States. With respect to U.S.-Europe trade, look, it always appears that we should be able to have a deeper trade relationship with Europe than we do. But real differences on regulatory issues continue to always remain. So whether it's food or chemicals or the right of privacy or competition policy, there are genuine differences between the US and the EU. So I wouldn't expect trade to be a major issue, nor would I expect there to be too much change. We're still going to be groping for answers to the trade questions in a system where the WTO is very weak and where real differences between the US and the EU on regulatory matters continue.
I would just add that Biden has been timid in my view, in removing the Trump tariffs on Europe. And these are our allies. We're now fighting a war together. We are literally fighting. It's the biggest war since 1945, and people really have not been serious. We've been involved in certainly the biggest war in Europe since 45, I should say. People haven't been serious about this. I mean, it's idiotic, as if in the middle of World War II, we were like hampering the importing of steel and other things from another country where we needed it to help make material for the war, leaving everything else aside. So Biden's been timid because there is opposition in both parties to moving ahead on freer trade. He hasn't removed the Trump tariffs, but he hasn't done anything in the other direction to speak of either. So I think the good news is it's the status quo, which is a pretty free trade friendly, I guess you could say, status quo. I do think after the pandemic, I wish people had made this point in the U.S. government. Is there ever been a better case for reasonably free trade and movement of capital, and especially for the U.S. and Europe and back and forth, than the vaccines? Where were the vaccines made? Where were the vaccines discovered and invented? And literally, most of the vaccines used in the U.S., if I'm not mistaken, at one point this was true, were physically made in Europe. And incidentally, people obeyed contracts by sending us vaccines, even when Europe was falling behind us in vaccination rate. Those vaccines were made, many of them, in parts of Europe. And so the idea that, we're going to go back to some kind of autarky or whatever is ridiculous at this point, I think. But I wish people had taken advantage of the solution to the pandemic, but the mitigation of the pandemic a little more by saying this is, do we really want not to be able to share the fruits of scientific research and the ability to manufacture these things around the world? Anyway, but I do think the lessons sort of sunk in that one way, that you can't really, people are totally idiots about this, that we do not want to have go back to a protectionist U.S. So I think the bad news is not huge progress in the next 2 years. The good news is not much movement the other direction. Trump's election did not mark, I think this is the good news, Trump's election did not mark a beginning of protectionism as U.S. policy. We're not in 1930 again, you know. There's nothing like Smoot-Hawley. I mean, I think that's a good thing. Trump's election marked a lot of other things. Immigration, on the other hand, we've been totally timid, and Trump really may have marked a change of policy in that respect. In my view, a very damaging policy change from our point of view.
So we've got another question. We've got a question on kind of the economic implications of the outcomes of this election and what they may mean for the future election. I mean, I think as an observer, it seems to me one of the interesting things is that for the most part, polls tell us that the public is worried most about inflation and or the economy, which is probably one and the same thing. But there's the Democrats and the Biden administration seem to get no credit for the very strong economic performance up until the last few months. We still have growth in the last quarter, lots of job creation, very low unemployment, but inflation and concerns about inflation seem to trump it all. Not to no pun intended, but the point being that will a Republican-controlled House, for example, try to push certain economic issues that would lead to maybe even more controversy inside Washington? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, Republicans' main message on the economy is just that we had too much spending and that's driving inflation. But I also think that even if you can point to those economic indicators, but ultimately it comes down to what voters are feeling and what they're seeing. And what they're feeling and seeing is that your grocery prices are higher. You're paying quite a bit more. Gas prices are you may not realize what the grocery prices are until you checked out, but like gas prices you see every day driving around. So you're very cognizant of when they're going up or down, and they were going down back in August and September. And that's not a coincidence that was when Democratic sort of hopes were rising and different things. And now that they're starting to go back up a little bit, there's more uncertainty. But again, I think it just boils down to those pocketbook issues, and it's what those kitchen table issues, what voters are feeling. And there's not a lot of confidence right now. And certainly the inflation is not just a US problem that we see. It's one clearly affecting Europe and the UK as well. But again, voters want to blame someone, and there's one party that controls everything. So that is who they are going to blame. And absent of, Rick Scott's plan that did more harm than good, there's not, Republicans haven't had to have an agenda to point to other than we won't be Democrats.
Yeah, it's interesting. In one of the polls that came out this weekend, Republicans believed that gas prices would go down if the Republicans won this election, and that Democrats, did not believe that. But, it has to do with what I have long thought is the case, is that publics often just want, politicians and the president in particular to be daddy and to solve problems. And inflation is an issue that the president has almost no control over, but it doesn't matter.
So on energy, I mean, this is where the Democratic Party hurts itself, in my opinion, as a sort of ex-Republican who would, I guess, be friendly to moderate Democrats. Energy production is higher in the U.S. than it was when Donald Trump left office. We never hear that. Why do we never hear that? Because a lot of that energy production is traditional energy. You can't go overnight to new forms of energy, and that is, and a lot on the left, for reasonable reasons, they think climate change, don't like that Biden is not in fact cracked down much on the extractive industries, on oil and gas and coal. He hasn't. Now, most of the money that he got earlier this year in the big legislation was for new industries, for solar and wind. So that was a victory, and I think it was a genuine victory, incidentally, which he also doesn't take much credit for some reason. But the Democrats are so conflicted on some of this stuff. I mean, a normal administration, or administration in sort of, I was in my day, a Democratic administration would have answered the thing by saying, you know what, we've increased gas production some, we're open to increase, and oil production some, we were open to doing it more on an emergency basis. Biden's been very tentative. Understandably, his coalition's very split on it. So Democrats have a tough time messaging, to pick up Jessica's term here, a kind of pro-growth economic message, because it does cut against maybe or it seems to cut against some of their messaging on climate and other issues.
We have a question about 2024 and some speculation, a question to get some speculation from all of you about how that race may develop post this election. In other words, how soon will people begin to throw their hats in the ring? Who might be throwing their hats in the ring? Do we assume that Biden will run again? What happens if former President Trump gets indicted? So any thoughts on that from all of you?
I mean, I think Republicans at this point are just happy that Trump didn't announce before the midterm elections, although there is still another week left. That was sort of the nightmare scenario, and that was what was driving a lot of people toward Democrats as well. As you know, because midterm elections should be about the current president, and that was what Republicans wanted them to be about. But with Trump inserting himself into so many races and primaries and being out there and holding rallies, there was quite a lot that voters could make the case that this is an indictment on the former president and his party that are following him. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see him get in, very soon thereafter at this point, because I think he needs to distract from possible indictment, what's going on at Mar-a-Lago and different things. I mean, the most interesting one to watch for me is what happens with Ron DeSantis's election, because he's clearly the one that seems most likely to run, even if Trump does.
And Ron DeSantis, just for is the Republican governor of Florida.
Yeah. It did strike me as particularly not an accident when Trump announced that he was going to Florida for a rally with Marco Rubio, who's also up for re-election, but not for DeSantis. So we've kind of seen them. I mean, DeSantis has even been out campaigning for other people. He should win handily his election and might even flip Miami-Dade County. Some Republicans are talking up that particularly, which is a traditionally very strong Democratic area. So, I mean, those are sort of the two big question marks, and where do people fall behind there? I mean, we can see Mike Pence running. I think some of the people that have broken from Trump could still run, but I'm not sure that has a path in that regard. So, and with Biden, I mean, he's 80. He's about to turn 80. I don't think you can definitely say he's running until he's definitely not. I mean, you always kind of assume that the incumbent is indeed running, but I mean, what I have seen, particularly in a lot of focus groups I've watched this cycle, I watched a lot with, people who voted for Trump in 2016 and then voted for Biden in 2020. They don't want either of them to run. They want new people on both sides, but it sort of feels inevitable, at least right now, that like the most likely scenario is still a Biden-Trump matchup.
Bill, any thoughts on from your sources inside the Republican Party?
I totally agree with Jessica about the sentiment out there, and I think this polling would also suggest surprising resistance to both Trump and Biden, even though Trump, in an actual just ballot test right now, each would be the leader in his own party. Trump's the most likely nominee. Doesn't mean it's a done deal. Maybe it's only 50-50 when you add in all the factors that could stop him. Being indicted will not stop him. If anything, it makes him more inclined to run, and I'm not sure it hurts him in a Republican primary if a Democratic administration indicts him, which is not a reason not to, in my opinion, but analytically, I don't see that it hurts him much. So he'll run most likely, and most likely be the nominee. I actually am more skeptical that Biden will be the nominee than Trump, because I just think almost every Democrat privately sort of hopes that he will choose a kind of to be a successful one-term president instead of trying to run a second time at age 82. And he could be a successful one-term president and could have a lot to be proud of, really, in terms of a transition to the future and stabilizing the country and for Ukraine, and if the inflation comes down, getting us through COVID and so forth, and getting some real legislation passed, as Ira said, in 2022, significant legislation. I mean, then do we just we would have a wide open Democratic primary. The one thing I would say is I do not at all agree with people who say that, Vice President Harris has it, is the prohibitor front runner. I don't even know if she's the front runner. I think it's a wide open race. I'm sort of personally willing to run that risk for generational turnover, because I just think Biden's too old, frankly, to do it again. But a lot of Democrats are with me until that last sentence and then say, oh my God, are we going to go through those 2019 Democratic debates again with 15 candidates, and maybe it's just safer? And Biden did beat Trump. No one else has. So I take that point. But if I had to bet, I mean, I would bet on a, Harris, Buttigieg, and 3 or 4 others, being in a actual Democratic primary in Iowa and New Hampshire. I guess it won't be Iowa anymore, but in New Hampshire and South Carolina and what other states they put up first, Michigan, in January, February of 2024. But I mean, who knows? This is just one point on the chaos of 2023. What if we had the current situation with everything else that's going on, the violence, the Republican Party, the conspiratorial, the conspiracists, McCarthy maybe as the new speaker, Pelosi stepping down, a 50-50-ish Senate, and uncertainty about the nominee in both parties, and real question, and not just uncertainty, but sort of real drama, you might say, about what might happen in both parties. It's a very unusual moment in American politics.
Ira, you're a lifelong Democrat. Any thoughts about the 2024 election? And might I add here an observation that if Biden does not run, how does the Democratic Party deny the nomination to a Black woman when Blacks and women are the 2 major constituency groups of the Democratic Party?
Well, look, my predictions on American politics were great in the 20th century. I haven't been too good in the last 20 years, but I have been of the view, or had been of the view, that Trump would not run again, and that's a minority viewpoint. I think that the key on the Republican side, I believe, is that others will not stand by and they won't, they'll run. DeSantis will run. Pence may run. Others, they won't stand by and let Trump get the nomination. And it'll be interesting to see how they deal with taking him down in a situation where obviously he still has great support within his party. So you have to be a little careful about that. And Republican primaries are generally, almost all winner-take-all primaries. So a plurality candidate can accumulate all these delegates. My view on Biden is that he will have to make a decision relatively early on, and I'm hopeful. I mean, he'll make the decision, and I hope that he personally will regard himself as transitioning to another generation. Simply because I think he's been an excellent president, but I don't think he can confidently say he can do the job for 6 more years, 2 years now and 4 if he's elected. With respect to Bruce's good question, I think the answer is that Democratic voters will decide. If Biden doesn't run, they will decide who will be the nominee. And if cumulatively they decide that it will be Vice President Harris, that's fine. But ultimately, if they decide not to, not to go with her, go with someone else, the party will come together behind that nominee. It is true we don't have an overwhelmingly strong base, bench, but in fact, didn't look like Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama were going to be presidents, nominees, and then presidents until they were. So the Democrats have a habit of turning up new faces every 8 or 10 years.
So just briefly, any of you, who do you think could be in the running other than Vice President Harris and maybe Buttigieg? And are there any other likely Democrats, or for that case, Republicans? We've mentioned Pence and DeSantis. Are there other kind of outliers who might pop up in the campaigns?
Roy Cooper is my dark horse. Yeah.
Don't you, Bill? Jessica?
I'm not sure she will if Trump will. She's bought into Trump world. She was, a critic before she joined the administration. My dark horse on the Democratic side is Roy Cooper, who's the Democratic governor of North Carolina. He's head of the Democratic Governors Association this cycle. He's won, even as Republicans have been vexed in other statewide offices and at the presidential level in the state. So I would look to some of these governors. Really, for a long time, governor was the best path to the White House. It's become the Senate most recently. But these governors have some different claims. I also think there will be some anti-Trump people that run, like Larry Hogan in Maryland, the governor that's term limited this cycle, who's been a Trump critic. So I'd watch for that one too. Chris Sununu, perhaps in New Hampshire, has hinted at it, even as he passed on a Senate bid this year.
I'm a Josh Shapiro guy, since he's a Shapiro. Or actually, in Philadelphia, it's pronounced Shapiro.
Okay, Bill, you got to.
I think look, governors, there are Democratic governors in major states. Newsom would like to run from California. Pritzker from Illinois. I don't know that either's the most compelling. Polis has been an excellent governor of Colorado, quite a moderate Democrat, pro-business. He's going to win a big re-election in a purplish state. And then I agree, Cooper. And so there are others. I am struck how much, when talking to Democrats, how much Buttigieg would have an edge, as he had a fantastic campaign in 2019-20, went from nowhere to basically tying for the victory in both Iowa and New Hampshire almost. And then, everyone got terrified that Sanders was going to win, and everyone defaulted to Biden. Just on your point, Bruce, for a second, identity politics is very strong among Democratic elites. Democratic voters, whites voted for black voters for Barack Obama against Hillary Clinton, and a lot of them in 2008. Blacks vote for white voter for blacks in South Carolina voted for Joe Biden. Straight Democrats voted for Pete Buttigieg, who's gay. Gay Democrats, men voted for Amy Klobuchar, who's a woman. I don't know. I think the voters are much less into identity politics than the.
Very good point.
So.
Well, anyway, we have reached the witching hour, and that's probably the appropriate term on Halloween. But I want to thank you all for a very fascinating conversation and some of the questions and comments I've received.
We are seeing the millibars drop, to your point. Winds are getting a little bit stronger. So it would not surprise me if this thing goes up. Do I think we're going to get to a Cat 2? I don't know. I don't know that we're going to have enough time to get all the way there. Perhaps we can, but I don't know that it's going to be just barely a Cat 1. I think we're probably going to be at a significant Cat 1.
Right. I agree with that. So this storm too, like we said, the beach erosion, I know you mentioned that when you were on the Weather Channel. I saw that interview. That was great. And the size of this storm is epic, right? 400 or 500 miles wide. I'm trying to let people know in the Tampa Bay area, this thing exits to the north. They're going to have squally weather, surge. I don't think enough people realize this could be a strong Cat 1, possibly, middle of the state, still hanging on to hurricane status. And we had Irma cut through the state as a 1. So I think we're going to have a lot of inland folks maybe caught off guard.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that's what it goes back to the trees and whatnot. It's going to be going over a basin. I can't remember exactly what the name of the basin is there in Central Florida, but it is going to be going over a basin that is super saturated. So again, I think we're going to have veg. I think we're going to have a lot of vegetative debris out of this thing. 60-mile-an-hour winds, even a gust every now and then to 75, 80 miles an hour is potentially possible there. And I think, and to your point, it's 3. I think Amy told me earlier today, Amy Gotzi, my chief meteorologist, said, I think she said 385 miles out as far as the wind flow goes. But, to your point, nearly 400. So this thing it's a massive storm. It's a massive storm. Going to be a lot of wind. I'm even a little bit concerned. Some of these latest, especially trending today, I think it was I know we're 1 hour off now, so I think it's probably the 4 o'clock or the 6 o'clock, actually showed that this thing was trending a little more northward, a little more westward, right? So now we're starting to bring in the Big Bend area, even over here to Tallahassee. Hurricane Hermine was a Cat 1 hurricane when it made landfall in Tallahassee, and it wreaked havoc here for 2 weeks. We were without power for 2 weeks. Hurricane Hermine up in Tallahassee. So I do believe you're going to see, to your point, significant wind damage, significant tree damage, vegetation, especially into these broader root trees, such as what Florida is known for, is its live oaks. I think you're going to probably see a lot of those topple down. So.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Well, so what should people like? The question is, everybody's so worried. Everybody always asks about specific locations. I know it's impossible. I would suggest national, weather service offices. Everybody's trying to compare this to Ian. It's no Ian as far as winds and surge go. But this beach erosion's going to be probably a big story, I think.
this is going to be, Hurricane Dorian was a beach storm. You hear that term in this area a lot. This is going to be a beach storm. It's going to be a beach storm. You hear sometimes, obviously, the fish storm, but this is going to be the beach storm. This is going to be. It's not. What's interesting is it's not Matthew. It's not Dorian, right? Where it goes up the coast. But there may be more beach erosion with what's going to be Hurricane Nicole, just whipping away for 48 hours, battering that coastline on the east side. And then maybe, I don't know, I'm sure you saw the warning or the watches go up, storm surge watches go up for the west coast of Florida now too. So there may be some of that, not so much on the nature coast because of the, obviously the mangrove protection there. Probably won't see nearly as much damage there, but man, that east coast, Treasure Island, Space Coast, First Coast, all of those areas are going to, I just believe they are going to get pummeled for, the part of 48 hours on just constantly getting that wave action, right? Somebody asked today in our EOC, it's almost like a claw that comes into the ocean and pulls it back. Every wave, just constantly clawing and pulling it back. So I again think we're going to have a significant beach storm all along the East Coast on this thing.
Yeah, I saw some Euro predictions of 50-foot seas out there, which obviously that's not going to reach the coast, but yeah. So let's go back to Ian real quick. How do you guys think the recovery's going? I guess that's probably Pine Island and those areas. Things are how's that progressing real quick?
Yeah, recovery's going good. We're deep into debris removal right now, trying to get as much debris collected up as we can across the area. Significant vessel and vehicles. One of our actions that we're doing with the Florida Sheriff's Association is using sheriff's office boats with side scan sonar to locate vehicles and whatnot that are underneath the water in the shallow waters of the coastal barrier islands. And they, between vehicles, vessels, roofs, other tidal property like ATVs and golf carts and things like that, they've identified over 3,000 targets that are underwater in those coastal barrier islands. So there's going to be a lot of cleanup out there for a significant amount of time. And we want to get that stuff covered and get it out of there now so that, if somebody's not coming through there at 30, 40 miles an hour on the water, hits something, and then causes somebody to lose their life. So we're spending a lot of time making sure that we're getting that stuff out of there. The governor's really leaning forward on trying to get the shrimp boat industry back up and running there. We've already reset 3 shrimp boats and looking to try to reset some more. And when I say reset, actually get them uprighted and then actually get them back floating in the water. So we've been able to do that with about 50 boats so far right now in the shrimp industry there. So, things are going right. It's going down the right path. The first restaurant opened up its doors on Fort Myers Beach this last week. Snook Bite is just give them a little shout out. They opened their doors, their first restaurant to do that. But so things are starting to come back to life. It's going to take a long time.
Right.
That recovery will take 3 years or better, but we're starting to see signs of life.
That's awesome. Yeah, I watched this whole progression, man, and I think you guys did a phenomenal job. Hats off to you for that. Looking back at prior storms, so it was good to see. But that's about it. I guess last, comparing, I guess I get the feeling a lot of people are just kind of shocked that we're in the middle of November. Are you guys getting the feeling like nobody can actually believe this is happening? Like maybe nobody's even like numb to it?
Right. November storms are not unheard of. They're obviously rare. I'm not really sure exactly what the last November storm was, but I remember Wilma. I worked Hurricane Wilma in Palm Beach. That was the November storm. So, it's not unheard of. They do happen, but it is. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people today, and they're like, I'm just ready for hurricane season to be over. Right. Well, nobody wants hurricane season to be over more than I do right now, but we're here at the division. We're always ready. We're prepared. The guys behind me are out there working their tails off. I'm really, really proud of them. And not just the guys here in the state EOC in Tallahassee, but the men and women that are working across the entire state of Florida. We've got thousands of responders between our state agencies, local agencies that are on what we call mutual aid deployment. we got thousands of people out there between Ian and now Nicole working across the state, and I really appreciate everything they're doing.
Yeah, I saw convoy powered trucks by Daytona Speedway, so it kind of got real when I saw that.
Absolutely.
All right, any best place to go, I guess, if anybody needs good information last second. Your all's website is what?
FloridaDisaster.org. FloridaDisaster.org. Of course, people can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at FLSERT, FLSERT, or Florida Cert.
Okay.
I'm going to do something. I'm going to take a little point of privilege here, Mike, and my comm staff's going to kill me for doing this. My wife is out there, honey. Love you. Hopefully, someday get to see you. I mean, we haven't seen each other in about 40 days, so.
Oh my goodness.
So I know she's fangirling out there, but anyway, I had to do that. This is a little bit less audience. So
well, hey, my wife's watching too. So hey, Julie. I'm all alone in a hotel room in Daytona tracking storms. I don't know what's going on inside my head, but well, I really appreciate and coming on our little show here, and we got a lot of great feedback the last time, and it brings a lot of credibility to what I do, and that means a lot. Trust me. So I want to thank all of you all for that.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to serve the citizens of the state, and I certainly appreciate your partnership, Mike, on getting the message out, the word out, making sure that everybody that follows you and Mike's other pages is on spot on as to what is going on in the state. So I appreciate your help on that, buddy.
All right, buddy. Well, have a great night, and we'll get through it, and you can go home to mama.
That's it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, buddy. Right. Well, how about that? I almost look like I know what I'm doing. Are we still streaming? Well, that was cool. That was the head director for the state of Florida for the Division of Emergency Management. So that's very good information there. Hope everybody got a little something out of that. And that was awesome. We had a ton of people watching. Holy cow! So yeah, Mr. Kevin Guthrie there. He'll be the man after the storm, helping everybody out. I don't know if you watched the Ian recovery, but he was there every day doing updates. Like every time I turned the TV on, he was on TV helping get the word out and helping the citizens of Florida here. So thank you everybody. Miss Shelley, I don't know if Miss Shelley's on there, and I got the most weirdest setup here. Now I can actually flip my camera on here. Let me try this out real quick. I got a little camera, so I don't have my normal setup at home, but I think I can turn my camera on now since I'm not using it. There I am. There I am in the bottom right. So at least you can see my ugly face. So the reason I'm at Daytona, first off, I got friends in Volusia County EOC. I wanted to meet a couple of them, and we got some big beach erosion going on here. There's some big stories of some buildings compromised right now that are actually hanging over the sand. The sand is eroded from Ian, and this is only going to be worse. So I was going to start here and go south a little bit. The storm is a day away. We're going to start. We already saw rain bands today. As a matter of fact, let's flip on the old radar here. Bear with me because I don't have my normal setup, but I drove through some rains here. There they are. You can start to see it coming into the picture. Those are outer rain bands making their way across the state already, and you're starting to pick up on it with radar. This thing's a day away. Landfall's tomorrow, and officially it's still 75-mile-an-hour hurricane. However, as we've been noting, the pressure has been dropping little by little. It's down to 986 pressure right now. So that's strong. We could get a little stronger storm, and the biggest thing is this: it might not make a difference, as far as effects go, if it's 75, 80, 85, 90, but it will make effects deeper in the state of Florida. The track has shifted a little south, and you can see it here. This is a great map. This purple line, it starts out here. This was the 10 a.m. advisory track. The 4 o'clock p.m. track, you'll see it shift south a little bit. So that actually put the track closer back to Tampa. So we're going to see effects through the state. I mean, it's, not hyping anything, but, schools are closing. We're going to see some surge on both sides of the coast, especially obviously the east side. Let me pull up some graphics here, and we're going to go over the latest with everything. Okay, I can't really read the comments too much, but oh, and I was going to tell you a story. Look at this. Right before the dang thing started, what are the chances of this? So let me turn my camera on. We had I had a fire alarm. Listen, here it is. Listen, we had a fire alarm going off. It was like 10 minutes before. I'm like, are you kidding me? All right, so here's the spaghetti models. Tightly clustered. There has been slow shifts to the north. However, the NH2 windshield wiper back down a little bit. The official line is still a little bit south of the consensus line. However, the European model is actually a little bit south of the black line. So the NHC uses a blend of ensembles, and they are getting a lot of hurricane data from the upper level high pressure to the north. How strong that high pressure system is, I saw a couple of different missions with the hurricane hunters today that actually were measuring that high pressure. And that stronger that high pressure is, the more it's going to kick this system through the state. And as Mr. Guthrie mentioned, we can see effects here on the Florida West Coast all the way up in part of the panhandle if this thing maintains any sort of low pressure. But let's take a look at the latest models. This is what's most important. So let's go to Tropical Tidbits. I want to show you all the latest models. Let's start out with the Euro. It's usually one of the best. Just to kind of give you a heads up. It did drop down to 988. Every run of the Euro has been lower and lower pressure, which eventually means wind speeds. Note the rain to the north. This system is huge as far as winds to the north and winds to the west. But 988 is the strongest the Euro has been the whole time. Here's what the winds would look like at pretty much ground level, wherever it makes landfall. But all these winds, this is what they're worried about. This is Thursday overnight, like 1 in the morning Thursday, not quite. So Wednesday night, Thursday morning likely landfall, Wednesday night, Thursday morning early. So we have 2 days, almost 3 days of these winds, and that's a huge wind field, regardless of where the actual eye sets up. Why the eye is important is if we do get a developing eye wall, these winds are, tropical storm force winds. The eye wall will be the issue as far as who gets the strong winds. If we do get a category 1, high 1, maybe 2, that eye wall is going to be an eye. We're going to have, strong storms and potentially, damages because we're dealing with an eye wall. So big winds to the north, eye wall to the south. So latest Euro keeps it, 992 right off the we're just north of Tampa Bay. This is midday Thursday. This is where they're starting to talk about some surge possibly down, spinning down even into Tampa Bay. They got 1 to 3 foot surge in Tampa. Doesn't sound like a lot, right? But we had 4 foot with Ada, and there were some places flooded. So, and the border somewhere around Tarpon, it goes up from there. And I can show you that here in a second. But as our system comes back, it's going to have a little chance to maybe fuel off of that Gulf of Mexico before that final turn. There's a big bad cold front coming down. It's going to merge with. Tropical storm force winds all the way up the eastern seaboard, Georgia, Carolinas, Virginia. This thing's going to turn into like a nor'easter style system that's going to shoot off to the northeast. Most of it's out of here by the weekend. There could be some lingering stuff for the northeast, but heavy winds regardless here along the eastern seaboard. And this is where you'll see these storms rolling in off of the Atlantic and the warm Gulf Stream. So that's what you will likely have tropical storm watches and warnings along at least South Carolina, North Carolina as our system races on by, because we're going to be seeing these tails here still coming up as our storm passes by on this is Friday morning. So the Euro went down a little south, closer to Middle State, close to Tampa, 988 landfall, 992 exit. However, this is where you have to start using a little bit of common sense here. The latest NHC has the pressure at 984 right now. The Euro initialized this run at 998, way off from current pressure. So this thing goes from 998. Oh, this is the 12Z. Let's see what this 18Z. Okay, it initialized 989, so it's not that far off. And it comes down to 985, 987. So it's dropping, but it's still initializing about 4 or 5 millibars, a little too high. So the euro's catching up. So the 18Z is even lower. 18Z comes down to 984 over the Bahamas on approach. Again, gets it pretty close to that Tampa Bay, 991 just north of Tampa Bay. And look, oof, that's what Kevin's talking about right there. So the euro's having a little window here now that this thing's going to go just a tick more west, and it's going to go around that Big Bend area. But as he mentioned with Hermine years ago, look at that. We're starting to see some signs that this thing could actually affect more of the panhandle with tropical winds. Definitely something to keep looking at. I mean, this has kind of been the theme all along, as this thing plopping through the state, getting a little bit more energy. You see, in the euro, even the euro drops at 991 over Tampa, 989 in the Big Bend. So it does try to bring back a little bit of punch. Not anything to stress about, but we could have a strong tropical storm, maybe still hurricane nearing the panhandle. Panhandle. This will be later Thursday. This thing's going to be hauling booty. So landfall for the euros late Wednesday night into early Thursday morning, and it could be over top of Tampa late morning as far as the center goes. But look at these effects. This is tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning. We're already going to see tropical storm force winds tomorrow morning reaching a big chunk of the Florida Peninsula because it's so wide. Important to note, though, here, Saturday morning, it's pretty much gone. But that euro is very important. It's pretty much summarized everything we've been talking about. Deepening pressure, winds across the state, strong winds to the north, very strong winds to the north, with some sort of effects on the Florida West Coast and up into possibly the Panhandle and into Georgia as this thing turns. And look, just follow this wind field. Even though our center's here, look, we got, these strong winds are still feeding off the Atlantic in that warm Gulf Stream. A couple other models real quick I like to look at. Let's look at the Icon. Latest 18Z Icon came in. This is Tropical Tidbits, by the way. Icon coming in at 985. I got a really teeny weeny monitor. The Icon shift, just almost exact placement as the euro, 985. Cuts to the state, 992. Little bit of, we're so confident here of what we're seeing. There really shouldn't be much questions right now. There's your heavy rains coming in late Wednesday night into early Thursday morning. They're going to cut across the state. Storms across the state. I'm telling you, we're going to see storms. And there's a little reemergence of energy across the Big Bend area, and that could make its way up into parts of the Panhandle later Thursday. So that's a very believable forecast. I think that's what we're looking at. The biggest question now is this. Here's a look at weather nerds. All right, so we do have dry air wrapping around the south side and trying to get in on the east side. It does have a little moisture bubble. Some of the higher resolution models were showing this closing off and fighting this dry air out. This is probably the only deterrent of anything rapidly intensifying is some dry air intrusion. You can kind of see it here on the latest satellite. Oh, Shelly. Satellite here. We almost have a little eye light feature here. Right here, little eye light feature. Little bit of lightning earlier in the day, but this is that dry air coming around. This is, hopefully going to choke it off for any really rapid intensification. But here's Florida. It's inching in, and every time the hurricane hunters go out there, the pressure's lower. I mean, we've had a pretty big pressure drop in 24 hours. We haven't had RI pressure drop, but we've had 12, 16 millibars, I think, in 24 hours. There's your convection, not incredibly impressive either. That's good news. Let's just hope it doesn't have a pop here. These things cycle. We'll see what kind of convection we get in the morning. It could be on one of these diurnal downtimes overnight. So it is tightening up. If you look at the latest tropical tidbits fix here, we got 984. Now notice the winds. The winds are coming up. Purple barbs. I think that's the first time we've seen purple barbs, indicating strong winds around the core. The difference of a subtropical system where just a couple of days ago, this whole area didn't have hardly any winds. All the strong winds were way outside of center. That's the number one sign of a subtropical system. Now that every run, the winds are getting tighter, and tighter, and tighter. And look at this. We're getting purple wind bars. Those are 83 knots flight level. So that's a sign of intensification, but the pressure is dropping. And they're out there right now. So we'll keep an eye on that. The wind field here, this is a great map from Boat US. Now we're seeing stronger winds throughout the state. The blue, I think this is like middle 50, 60. I don't know the cutoff on the blue, but yellow is tropical storm force winds. You can see the large area of possible tropical storm force winds all the way up the eastern seaboard, all the way up to Maine. But there, we got blue line is inching in. And if this thing gets a little stronger, these stronger winds are going to cut through the state a little bit more. Let's look at the last model here. I want to take a look at the H-Wharf. It's been my favorite model. It's still hovering right at 974. This is what it could look like in the radar sense as it comes across the state. For example, this would be before daybreak on Thursday, but we could start to see tomorrow some pretty significant rain bands entering the state. This is Wednesday evening, tomorrow night. But there's the core. The strong stuff comes overnight, unfortunately, overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Here's the big curious part. I got a lot of hate on mentioning Tampa might get some rough stuff, but I'm going to stick to it. Tampa Bay, this thing exits. We're going to see rotating squall lines wrapping around Thursday morning, and we could see some stronger cells, not hurricane, enough to bring some storm surge and some nasty weather. Remember, tornadoes are a big part of tropical systems, and the Storm Prediction Center is already showing that here. This is for tomorrow, dark green. And then, that's actually, that's today. This is Wednesday, dark green, which is definitely, they talk about it. Couple tornadoes appear possible Wednesday evening, Wednesday night as our storm approaches. And then on Thursday, this actually moves up into the Carolinas because as our system moves on out of here, right, we got counterclockwise storms coming in off of that Atlantic, and we could see strong squally weather for the East Coast. As far as rain goes, there's some other graphics I had up. Here's one. Really surprised about this one. It's been steadily showing normal range you would expect with a tropical system. Only a small area in the 4 to 6 range. I think that's because some of this dry air is expected, not a lot of moisture. So the good news is this isn't Ian as far as those crazy 20-inch plus rain totals. However, yellow is 4 to 6. We could see pockets inching up to double digits, but dark green's 2 to 4. Hopefully, it's not that big of a rain event. Your surge maps have been updated. They're all on my site. We have 2 to 4 foot here
to flip a seat. Catherine Cortez Masto, their first-term senator, first Latina elected to the Senate, and as you mentioned, Laxalt has certainly a political pedigree. Although, as Democrats have pointed out, he didn't actually grow up and spend most of his formative years in the state because his mother was living in Washington D.C. and working here. And this is where, again, the economy has been especially hard hit in Nevada, given its reliance on gaming and tourism and different things. That we also expect to see a very, very close governor's race there. I think also the Democratic governor, Steve Sisolak, is the most endangered Democratic governor in the country at this point. So, but again, we may not know for days really some of these votes, but depending upon when they're being counted. So I don't think we're going to have a clear picture, maybe a slightly clearer picture, but I don't think we're going to have the full picture of where the Senate stands tonight.
Jessica Taylor, will we have a picture of who wins in Arizona?
That's a state that I think might be even behind where Nevada is. There's actually been a challenge to wait to release some votes. We were expecting them about 11 p.m. our time here on the East Coast. It looks like if the challenge goes through in Maricopa County, that might not be until 1 a.m. our time. And Arizona is not a state that particularly counts votes very fast. And I was talking with a Democratic source there in the state last night, in fact. And if there were absentee ballots that arrived essentially over the weekend and yesterday on Monday or today, those had not been ready to be counted yet, that they were not even going to count them until post-election day. So again, this is a state that is very heavily early voting. That's where Democrats feel like they could get an advantage, but also we've seen the really heavy Republican turnout other places just sort of swarm those. And until we get a better picture of what election day turnout looks like in some of these states, it's really just too early to tell.
Well, you mentioned this in Georgia, that right now Herschel Walker is running behind the incumbent governor, Brian Kemp. Mm-hmm. In Pennsylvania, is that also the case where the gubernatorial and the senatorial candidates are not getting the same percentages?
I don't expect that to happen. The polls had just closed there right before I came on air, so I haven't seen any, if there are numbers coming in yet at this point. But we fully expect that the Democratic Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, will fairly easily defeat the Republican Doug Mastriano, who's been a top election denier. National Republicans have distanced themselves from his campaign. He has some anti-Semitic ties to groups with anti-Semitic views and different things. So Republicans have really sort of kept their distance on that one. But where they are not, of course, is in the Senate race. And this is one that, even a couple of months ago, we had that race rated lean Democratic, as that was clearly moving in Democrats' direction. It is very much tightened up now. And, some of the exit polling, the early exit polling that we are seeing, which will change throughout the night as it is weighted with the vote, it is really just showing a very, very tight contest there. And I think the Lieutenant Governor, John Fetterman, has to hope that certainly Shapiro provides him with a boost as well, whereas Oz could be dragged down by Mastriano. They were at the Trump rally together, but you have not seen them, campaign in sort of a symbiotic way in the least.
Well, about $100 million has been spent in that Senate race, and two former presidents and one current president were all in the state on the same day, weren't they?
Yes. President Biden is not helpful in most of these states. So you are seeing him go to more Democratic-leaning states and places with tighter than expected governor's races like Oregon and New Mexico. But I'm not sure you could keep Joe Biden out of Pennsylvania if you tried. He's talked about many times. He's the proud son of Scranton. And so he was up there sort of in Northeast PA. And, and of course you had President Obama there, and then Trump really comes in. He won the state once, but lost it to Biden. So, what Fetterman has to do is win back some of those blue-collar voters that has traditionally been voting Democratic, but went for President Trump in 2016, but Biden won many of them back. Those are the swing voters that we are looking at and where they end up. And is the turnout going to be big in, the two big strongholds in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia? And then what do the suburbs do around
around Philadelphia is another thing that I'm looking at. Republicans have been feeling a little bit better about those that I talked to in the past few days. So will that hold?
Well, one of the races that we began this cycle talking a lot about was Wisconsin, but it seems to have become a second-tier race at this point. Is that fair?
Yes, we moved it in our final ratings to lean Republican. I think there's a good chance that no Republican incumbent, at least, is going to lose tonight. Of course, again, that Pennsylvania seat, as we're talking about, because it is left behind by Republican Pat Toomey's retirement, that is a possible flip for Democrats. And that was one of the 2 states that Republicans are having to defend that voted for Biden. The other is there in Wisconsin with Ron Johnson, who initially said he would only serve two terms, gone back and is now seeking a 3rd term. He's certainly a divisive figure to many people. He started with very low approval ratings and favorability ratings that would be, in the 30s, that are a warning sign for any type of incumbent, but he's improved his standing there. He faces the Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. They've really tried to paint him as far too liberal, particularly on issues of crime. I heard Kirk earlier talking about how this is playing in places like New York. We're certainly seeing it play there in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin too. It seems to have had an effect. Listen, Wisconsin is always a very close state, but those last few points can just be very difficult for Democrats to get. We also have just a complete margin of error race in the governor's race with Tony Evers trying to defend there against his Republican challenger, Tim Michels. And so, but we are also seeing very heavy turnout particularly in college areas and college precincts there in Wisconsin. So that's certainly an encouraging sign for Democrats. But again, Wisconsin has just a ton of white rural voters, blue collar, non-college voters, and that is where the difficulty comes for Democrats.
You mentioned Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. Her opponent, Don Baldock, National Republicans got on board with him at the end, didn't they, of this campaign?
Yeah, it's sort of, you got to run with the candidate that you have in many instances, and I think Republicans did need to maximize the number of seats that they could compete in. I mean, of the sort of, I've looked this all cycle, it's that quartet of 4 Democratic incumbents all in their 1st term. Some like Mark Kelly in Arizona and Raphael Warnock running for a full term after just having won special elections 2 years ago. So you have them in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and then New Hampshire here. Again, I think if we'll look back, if Republicans fall just short, perhaps, Democrats are able to hang on, it's going to come down to candidate quality, and it's going to come down to recruits that they missed out on in particular, because Republicans were convinced that popular Governor Chris Sununu, who we expect to cruise to re-election, they elect their governors every 2 years there instead of every 4 years, that they fully expected him to run. When he decided not to, sort of decrying the state of partisanship and in the Senate and different things. And listen, when you've been a governor and you're sort of the top dog, it's hard to go to be one of 100. We've seen other governors like Joe Manchin, other former governors like Joe Manchin that have been frustrated with that pace. So they really were not getting any really strong recruits. National Republicans, of the ones they had, certainly preferred State Senate President Chuck Morse. You saw the McConnell super PAC going in and trying to boost him while Democrats were trying to boost Baldock. If someone like Morse had won, we have seen this race tightening. That could have made a difference. Baldock, they have gotten behind him, but we still saw McConnell super PAC pull out money there. The National Republican Senatorial Committee has gone in with a little bit more money with a coordinated buy, meaning that Baldock's campaign could get the lower advertising rate. But again, they missed out on very top recruits there. I mean, again, we're still seeing the results here come on, but if things change in the numbers and it looks like Maggie Hassan could be endangered, I mean, that portends a very bad night for Democrats. If she hangs on, okay, this is not going to be, a sort of a 5-alarm fire.
Well, Jessica Taylor, how do you spend $40 million in a state like New Hampshire?
Well, it has the Boston media market that is very expensive as well. But yeah, certainly, we're only getting a taste of it here in D.C. and with a couple of competitive House races. But I expect people in these swing states, you cannot watch television without just seeing the ads repeated and repeated and repeated. But again, I think it comes down to that Boston media market. And, they had a governor's race also in Massachusetts. So some of that was taking up airtime, probably not as much. but it does have a little bit higher cost than you would expect even for a state as small as New Hampshire.
I want to ask you about two more Democratic incumbents. These races have been talked about a little bit, Colorado and Washington State.
Yeah, so this was sort of when things were looking more dour for Republicans this summer after the Dobbs decision that sent the Roe v. Wade abortion question back to the states. There was some early spring sort of chatter about these states, and that if it really was a very good environment, then they could really play in states that, Colorado used to be a swing state during the Bush years, and it's been pretty firmly in the Democratic camp there. And so Republicans actually have very good nominees in both of these places. Construction company owner Joe O'Dea is a moderate, has talked up his support for abortion rights, and is the type of Republican, if you were going to run and win in a place like Colorado, that might happen. The Democratic senator there, Michael Bennet, he's actually, he's run in tough years before in 2010. In 2016, he's fallen in 2016 just below a majority of the vote. In 2010, he had a harder race, certainly. And so they really felt like he might be vulnerable. We've still rated this race as lean Democratic. I haven't seen an evidence of an overwhelming upset there. But it is one to keep an eye on. And then Washington State's another place. You have Patty Murray. She was elected, in the Year of the Woman in the 90s, and she campaigned as a mom in tennis shoes. And so she's running against another mom who she's pointed out is the same age she was when Murray was elected to the Senate in '94. Tiffany Smiley, she's a former nurse and particularly an veterans advocate after her husband was wounded overseas, lost his eyesight. She fought for him to remain an active duty member. And so she's done a lot of work on that. And, but Washington, to me, it gave us a little bit of a preview in August because they use a top two primary system. And so Murray got about 52% of the vote, but when you added all the other Democrats in, it was closer to 54, 55. And so that's just for her to drop that much, I just have a hard time seeing, even as some polls have shown this tightening. I think that Smiley just has a long way to go in a state where Biden won by almost 19 points. But again, if you had a Tiffany Smiley, if you had a Joe O'Dea running in a place like Colorado or Arizona, where Republicans have weaker candidates, I think we'd be talking a very different look at the map. And that overall, unfortunately for Republicans, their best candidates are still in more difficult states, and they've sort of had to run with weaker candidates in states where they should have been able to be more competitive. They can still win with those candidates, certainly, especially as we've seen the climate deteriorate for Democrats, particularly over these last few weeks. That's where I'm hearing alarm from Democratic strategists as we go into tonight. But comes down to climate versus candidate, and I think over the summer we saw that candidates were really beginning to matter, but now as the climate has deteriorated for Democrats, that may not hold, and the climate and just the more parliamentary nature of the Senate that we have seen in recent elections could win out.
Jessica Taylor is the Senate and Governor's editor at the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. One more race that's kind of an interesting race is the Utah race and Senator Mike Lee.
Yeah, this is not a traditional R versus D race. You have Mike Lee there who, was a Trump skeptic, did not vote for him in 2016, he said. In fact, he voted for the man who is running against him, Evan McMullin, a former CIA operative who ran as an independent sort of anti-Trump candidate there. There was a lot of Trump skepticism in Utah among the Mormon community, and that's actually where McMullin, who obviously is from Utah, got a lot of his support. But we've seen Lee really become a supporter of Trump, questions about his activities on January 6th and different things. And so McMullin has run this race. He has said he will not caucus with either party, but he's running sort of with the tacit endorsement of Democrats who did not endorse a candidate. So he's hoping to sort of meld together independents, Democrats, and maybe disaffected, more moderate Republicans. We've seen it close in some polls, but I think there's sort of been sort of a bit of a flare that went up that Mike Lee was saying, hey, listen, you need to give me money. This could be a closer than expected race. But again, because this is not a traditional R versus D race. It's a little harder to read as much into it there, but were McMullin to pull off the upset, the fact that he has said he won't caucus with either party becomes a bit of an interesting scenario there, because what if he is the deciding vote, perhaps in that way?
Jessica Taylor, we'll be back with you in just a few minutes to talk about governors. We appreciate your time, but let's check in with Greta Brawner again.
Let's start with the big picture, the number overall. You were just talking about some of the Senate races and the price tag for them, but David Weigel tweeted out early this morning that this midterm election cycle, we're looking at a price tag of about $16.7 billion. Compare that to 2018 midterms, and it was $5.7 billion. And he says, you're not imagining it. There are more ads and texts and paid canvassers than there ever have been in an off-year election. So that just took a look at the price tag, $16.7 billion for this midterm election cycle. A lot of money spent in the state of Florida, but Marco Rubio cruised to a third term tonight, beating Val Demings, the Democratic Congresswoman, 56.6% to 42.4%. He is declared the winner. Interestingly, Val Demings came in first in total dollars from out-of-state donations, $22.6 million in out-of-state donations to her campaign. The Democratic Party not putting any money, hardly any money into that race. Let's go to the Georgia Senate race. Obviously, this is too early to call. We don't have a lot of the percentage, a large percentage of the vote reporting yet. And Raphael Warnock vying for a full term here at 51% to Herschel Walker's 47%. We're going to keep an eye on this race all night long. It might be one, as you just heard Jessica Taylor talk about, one that we don't know yet. If one of these candidates does not get 50% plus one, they're headed for a runoff on December 6th. In Indiana, Todd Young wins another seat. He's declared the winner there, 59% to 37%, wins another term. Let's go to Kentucky. Rand Paul declared the winner tonight, 56%. Rand Paul last time around in 2016 won with 57.3% of the vote. He's looking at about 56, around the same percentage of vote as he did 6 years ago. This will be his third term in Congress. And then in the state of North Carolina, this was an open seat left open by the retirement of Senator Richard Burr, the Republican. And right now, it's too close to call. You know, we've got 20% of the vote reporting. The Democrat is in the lead. Obviously, we'll keep you updated on that race as we go through the night. New Hampshire Senate race. Maggie Hassan trying to hold on to this seat. Challenged by Donald Baldock, as you just heard Jessica Taylor talking about. Just want to show you where the vote is right now with 15% reporting. In the state of South Carolina, Tim Scott declared the winner. He will get his second full term. You'll remember that Tim Scott, he was, in 2021, he delivered the Republicans Party's rebuttal. You remember that. He was appointed to the Senate seat by former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in 2013 following the resignation of Jim DeMint, then won a special election in 2014 to serve the remaining 2 years of the term. And in 2016, he's won his first full term in office. He's the only Black Republican in the U.S. Senate, and he has said that this will be his final 6-year term in office. Senate Vermont race, this one was called very early on. Peter Welch running for retiring Senator Patrick Leahy's seat. He wins with 67% of the vote. Let's go to the state of Alabama tonight and see where this one stands. The Republican candidate there with 61% of the vote. We've got 1% reporting, so we've still got lots of results to come in some of these races. In Arkansas, John Bozeman, the Republican there, vying for another term. He's in a solid lead right now with 75% of the vote. He was declared the winner, I should say, actually, with 75% of the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. In Alabama, we had a winner there, too. Katie Britt, the Republican. So let's move on to Connecticut, though. Richard Blumenthal also declared the winner, 56% to 54%. Richard Blumenthal with the W. In the state of Illinois, Tammy Duckworth, she is victorious tonight, 61% to 37%. And let's go down to Oklahoma. James Lankford, who won the last time around with 67.7% of the vote. He also, with a win tonight, 57% to 40%. And then there's one last race here to talk about this time around. This is in the Oklahoma special election. Jim Inhofe announcing his retirement, and Markwayne Mullen declared the victor tonight. He has been serving in the House. He's probably a familiar name to many of you, especially because of the role he played on January 6th. Again, all of our results can be found on cspan.org.
And during this first hour, we wanted to give you a sense of what is happening in the House, the Senate, and the gubernatorial races, and we will be taking your calls as well. Let's get those lines up on the screen so you can see how to dial in and participate. We're going to ask you who you voted for and why. 202 is the area code, 748-8920. If you are a Democrat, 748-8921 for Republicans. All others, 748-8922. You can also send a text message to 202-748-8903. Please include your first name and your city, if you would, when you send that text messages. And of course, all of our social media sites are available for commenting and participating in the conversation. At C-SPAN is our handle for all of them. Well, we're rejoined by Jessica Taylor to look at some of the gubernatorial races. 36 total gubernatorial races are being decided tonight. Currently, Democrats control 16 of them, Republicans 20 of them. Those are all the states in gray that are electing Republicans. Jessica Taylor, will there be a new balance of power when it comes to Democrats or when it comes to governors tonight, after tonight?
Yeah, so we're at 28 versus 22. I think there's a lot of races that are just in still in the toss-up category. We know that Democrats are definitely going to pick up 2 seats, and that's with open Republican-held seats in Massachusetts and in Maryland. Republicans had very much hoped that Charlie Baker would seek a 3rd term. He's been a very moderate governor, anti-Trump. Well, former President Trump waded in, endorsed his opponent. A lot of Baker's strength and popularity in a state like Massachusetts came from independent and Democratic voters. He faced a very real threat of losing that primary. And instead, it certainly looks like the Democrat there, Attorney General Maura Healey, will very easily win. And she will become the first lesbian governor in U.S. history as well. And then in Maryland, we've already had a race call there where author Wes Moore will be the next governor of Massachusetts, another place where you had Larry Hogan, certainly has been a very loud critic of Trump, has teased a 2024 run of his own, sort of on an anti-Trump platform, was term limited. He backed his former Commerce Secretary in that primary, but instead Trump's choice, Dan Cox, who is just a further right candidate. That's not how you win races in places like Maryland and Massachusetts. But this is a place where Trump's endorsements really messed up potential Republican holds in these states. So you have Moore that will be the governor there. He's certainly a rising star to watch with Democratic politics, and he becomes the first African-American governor in Maryland's history. But the toss-ups the closest races that I'm watching tonight to see whether they flip are in Wisconsin with Tony Evers, very close race there with Tim Michels. The Republican, I still believe, Steve Sisolak in Nevada, I think is still the most endangered by just a hair probably. The governor he's running against, this is where Republicans got the candidate that they did want with Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo. So he has run and won in Clark County there, which is Las Vegas. Now, a Republican is not going to carry Clark County, certainly not. But if he can just decrease the margin that they usually lose by. And then in Nevada, it always really comes down to Washoe County, which is Reno there, and how that decides. But some of the Democratic governors that looked more vulnerable at the start of the cycle ended up being not that vulnerable. So someone still in a very close race, Laura Kelly is the Democrat who won in an upset in 2018. She's facing Attorney General Derek Schmidt there, but her popularity has remained high. Republicans have been a little bit frustrated with the type of campaign that Schmidt has been running, and really felt like he waited too late to sort of begin his campaign and capitalize on different things. So there's certainly a possibility that we could see Laura Kelly hang on. Now, in governor's races, they don't follow national trends as much as we see in House and Senate races, because you're not voting for, if you're voting for a governor, you're not voting for who you want to control a body like you are in the House and the Senate. The party doesn't get any prize if they have the most governors across the country. Certainly, it's a boasting point in different things. But so we will see there. But there have been some surprising races that have popped up on the radar. I think none is more surprising than Oregon. An open seat there, Democratic Governor Kate Brown is the most unpopular governor in the country. And so we have a really interesting three-way race there with Tina Kotek, who was the former State House Speaker, the Democrat, running against Christine Drazen, the former State House Minority Leader. And then you have a wealthy and well-fundraised independent, a former Democratic state legislator, Betsy Johnson, running there, that has made this a race and really given Republicans an opening in a way. And so, but we have seen Johnson's support really start to dip a little bit. There's not really a path for her to win, but the question is, does she take enough votes away from the Democrat that lets Republicans in there? But again, Republicans early on thought that, the Midwest was going to be their key back, and certainly that's held in Wisconsin. They feel like Minnesota could be tightening, but we still rate that one as likely Democratic, because Gretchen Whitmer is in another closer than expected race from even what we saw a few months ago. We had this in likely Democratic. We moved back to lean Democratic just a few weeks ago. But again, the fact that probably Democrats or Republicans have better shots at flipping a place like Oregon sort of tells you that this is not following one cohesive pattern.
Well, I also wanted to ask about the New Mexico governor's race. This is not one that I'd paid much attention to until I saw it on the maps recently.
This is another one that Republicans are very bullish on. So you have the governor there, Michelle Lujan Grisham, who took a lot of heat during COVID for her policies, and Republicans have really sort of tried to paint her as a hypocrite for expenses that she made during the pandemic. Another place where crime is playing a major issue, Albuquerque has seen certainly rising crime and murder rates. And there were allegations of sexual misconduct with a former staffer that Lujan Grisham then settled with. And the Republican there is Mark Ronchetti. He actually ran for Senate 2 years ago in an open seat that Ben Ray Lujan ended up winning, but he ran closer than expected. And so in this even a more favorable year to Republicans, he's a former TV weatherman in the Albuquerque area. I mean, one of the best candidate profiles that you can have is a local TV news anchor and local TV weatherman. People love their local news and they love their weathermen. We've still rated this race as lean Democratic, but it's one I am going to be watching for as the vote comes in, because again, Democrats have still had Lujan Grisham with a pretty comfortable lead. Republicans feel like it is a more margin of error race. Some of the public polls we saw in the final week of the race, it gave the incumbent governor there about a 6 to 7 point lead.
Now it's almost 9 p.m. Eastern time here on the East Coast. I believe the polls in New York close at 9 p.m. and the governor's race there. Where are you going to be looking? Any certain areas of the state when you look at the votes coming in for the Hochul-Zeldin race?
I'm going to be looking in New York City and see where turnout is. I've talked with Democrats that are very worried about turnout in the city and what that could mean, particularly in some of the boroughs like the Bronx, Queens, You have, again, as you said, Hochul there became governor, the state's first woman governor when Andrew Cuomo resigned. She's running against Lee Zeldin there, a congressman from Long Island. Zeldin can, where his numbers are in his native Long Island there, if that's helping boost him. How is Hochul running, outside of the state? And, she's not from the city. She's from Buffalo. She's a former congresswoman from Buffalo, had won a special election in 2011. And so, again, Democrats are very worried about turnout in this race. And, with just the rising crime, or people feeling more unsafe because they're seeing, these issues really played up by especially some of the tabloids in the city, like the New York Post and different things. So Hochul, I think this is going to be a closer race, but I still think it's still New York at the end of the day. And we still give her the edge. We've kept our rating there at likely Democratic.
Jessica Taylor, has the race been called yet in Florida? I believe some news organizations have already called the Marco Rubio Senate race, but have you called the Ron DeSantis, Charlie Crist race yet?
We don't call races, so I believe the AP has called it. I know CNN has called it, I believe, but this one, it really didn't look to be close. In the end, we've had this in sort of the likely Republican column for most of the cycle. Florida's a state that's typically close, but like those last few points are just Herculean for Democrats. And DeSantis has built up a massive, massive war chest. The Democratic primary there wasn't until late, and you had the former governor, Charlie Crist, but I mean, he's switched parties so many times. He was a Republican as governor, then ran as an independent for Senate and lost, and then he was elected to the Congress. So he's been through many different iterations of his career, but it really never felt like DeSantis was in that much danger there. And certainly he's looking for a big win as a potential springboard to 2024. I mean, I think those stories are already getting told or already getting written, especially as Trump, stares down a potential 2024 announcement next week. How these two have, it's been notable because Trump actually came to the state for a rally with Rubio, but DeSantis was not invited.
And in fact, we're expecting former President Trump to speak tonight from Mar-a-Lago about some of the results. One final question. I know you're going to come back a little bit later and give us updates, but in Ohio, when it comes to ticket splitting, Mike DeWine, double-digit victory, J.D. Vance, a pretty close race against Tim Ryan.
Yes, this was one of the states where I thought there could be a wide sort of chasm with ticket splitting there. Certainly Mike DeWine has never really looked like he's in very much trouble. I'm not sure if the race has been officially called there yet, but he was certainly ahead by a wide margin last I was able to check. And, again, this is a case that just shows you, in the Senate at least, how Republicans sort of frittered away some chances. If Rob Portman, who made a sort of a more surprising announcement last year that if he had run again, this was a race that would have stayed in the solid Republican column. But instead, Republicans nominated, after a very messy Senate battle that was actually the first primary of the season, nominated J.D. Vance, who struggled to raise money. He had the backing from Peter Thiel, the former PayPal co-founder and sort of a more libertarian-leaning businessman. I mean, J.D. Vance is someone, though, that, Hillbilly Elegy author, he was recruited by McConnell even a few cycles ago to try to get him to run for Senate. And he was, sort of a never-Trumper guy. But despite that, and despite having a lot of video evidence that his opponents tried to remind voters of, Trump did endorse him, and that's really what was the key to him winning that primary. But it just felt like he went into witness protection over the summer, that he had, again, he had plenty of time. He became the nominee at the beginning of May. And you have Tim Ryan, who has run perhaps the best race of any Democrat in the country. Unfortunately, he's still running in a state that has been leaning Republican. And, again, I wouldn't be surprised if this race comes down to a few points. But we've kept this race in lean Republican just because the nature of the state. And when we do look at that ticket splitting, while it's a wider margin than we may see, I think even that has its limits of people going to crossover vote.
Jessica Taylor of the Cook Political Report with Jessica Walter. We appreciate your time. We'll see you a bit later this evening. Greta Bronner's on the web. What do you got, Greta?
Well, I'm going to go back to that Florida governor's race, but just to show you how quickly the state of Florida can count the vote with 87% reporting. As you said, Governor Ron DeSantis sweeps Charlie Crist and wins another term. 87% reporting there. Some other wins that have been declared, some other races declared by the Associated Press. Kay Ivey defeats her challenger. She gets another term as governor in the state of Alabama. In the state of Illinois, another incumbent, J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic governor there, he wins another term. The Associated Press declaring that he won. And then in New Hampshire, Chris Sununu sails to victory here over the Democratic challenger. That was not questioned. It just is what will happen to the Senate race in New Hampshire. Some people were looking at this governor's race to see what kind of percentage Chris Sununu has in the end, and does that help the Republican challenger in the Senate, Don Baldock. In South Carolina, Henry McMaster, he cruises to victory as well to win a second term as governor in the state of South Carolina. That one was called early on by the Associated Press. And then in the state of Tennessee, the Republican incumbent Bill Lee is victorious tonight.
Well, let's hear your voices. We want to know who you voted for and why, and we're going to begin in one of those contested states, and that's Danny in West Bend, Wisconsin, on our Democrats line. Danny, where'd your votes go today, and why? What were some of the issues that affected them?
Yeah, so one of my main votes was for Tony Evers as our governor. Honestly, I just really was distasteful of Tim Michels, especially his advertising campaigns. Like I saw one of these ads where he was using his daughter, who I believe had cancer, for his campaign. That was really off-putting to me. And I mean, just his overall motives, especially on the topic of Roe v. Wade and abortion. I don't personally agree with his things there, and I think that that's really important for my community.
And when you say your community, what do you mean by your community?
I mean by the people that I live around. I don't think that their rights should be restricted, whether or not that they're a man or a woman, especially in the terms of health care.
And what about the Senate race, Mandela Barnes, Ron Johnson?
I also voted for Mandela Barnes again because just Ron Johnson's poor decisions that I've seen him make in the Senate that I personally disagree with, especially on the lines of, especially the fiscal decisions that have been made.
Thank you for calling in this evening. Felix in Lexington, Kentucky. Another Democrat. Has it been a good night for Democrats in Kentucky, Felix?
I would say it's a good night because Kentucky's constitutional amendment number 2 in the ballot, where they were trying to ban abortion throughout the state, looks like it's actually going to fail pretty easily. 55% of people are voting no, so I'm very happy to see that result. And
is that the same type of ballot that Kansas did a while back, where they put abortion as legal on the ballot as an initiative, right?
It was a constitutional amendment here, so it's a bit more indirect. The ballot was asking if you wanted it to make clear in the Constitution that there is no guaranteed right to an abortion. So I voted no on that because I'm pro-choice. Although another race I want to mention is my congressional district, Kentucky 6th, where the Democrats, this perennial candidate, Jeff Young, sort of won the nomination very unexpectedly, and he has received all sorts of criticism for his stances. I don't want to sully your program, but the Kentucky Democratic Party chair called him, quote, batshit crazy, because on his Twitter he talks about how he thinks Ukrainians are Nazis and how he supports Xi Jinping and Putin. So as much as I wanted to vote for the nominee, my party, my district, my moral compass couldn't stomach voting for a guy like that.
Who is the current congressperson from the 6th district in Lexington? Is that Mr. Andy Barr's seat?
Yes, Andy Barr. He was originally elected 2010, so he's running for a 7th term. but I really can't support a Republican, especially with his stance on abortion. So I wrote in another Democrat, Randy Cravens.
And Mr. Barr's seat has been one of those bellwether seats many times in the election cycles, too.
It has. I mean, it was supposed to be competitive in 2018 against Amy McGrath, but he did end up winning that one. So 2022 not going to be as good a year as for Democrats as 2018. So I figured there wasn't a chance of Mr. Young winning, so I wouldn't really be wasting my vote.
And did you vote for Rand Paul's opponent?
Charles Booker, yes, I quite like Mr. Booker. He visited UK, got to meet him. He's a very nice guy, and I support his policies. So yes, I did vote for Mr. Booker. Felix, are you a student at the University of Kentucky? I am. I'm a freshman. So this is actually my first time voting. Oh, well, welcome to the voting world. What are you studying, and where are you from originally? Well, my family's from the Kentucky area, but I grew up in the Nashville area, and I'm studying linguistics at UK. Thanks for calling in. We sure appreciate it. Let's hear from Chad out in Sun City, California, Republican line. Chad, have you had a chance to vote yet? And are the polls are still open out in California, aren't they?
Indeed, yeah. I'm from Riverside County, more of a conservative area of California.
Is it Ken Calvert who represents you?
Indeed, he's been here a while. I guess he brings home the pork. You know, I tried selling him a copier one day to his office, his real estate office. He never called me back, but that's okay.
All right. So, what are some of the issues that motivated you to get out and vote today?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a shame we used to in this country really debate policies, what ideas work, what ideas don't work. I think that's on the table a little bit. I was 9 years old in 1984. My dad was campaigning in Minnesota when it wasn't really good weather against Walter Mondale. So I like to think the conservative side is what ideas work over the test of time. And I think when we look at inflation and people are really understanding, do we spend money and do we pay higher prices? We all kind of have to live through human experience to understand what we're going to vote for the next time. And the fact that we can change governments very quickly is a blessing.
That's Chad in California, and this is Jeannie, an independent in Manassas, Virginia, right outside of Washington here in a very contested area. Jeannie, as an independent, which way did your vote go today?
Yes, I voted for Jennifer Wexton in CD10 against Hung Cao, who is a retired captain who's a Vietnamese American, which is where I came from. So I vote against my own people because he's against my values. So I thought I should share that with you.
Well, Jeannie, we appreciate that. What are some of those issues that you disagree with Mr. Cao on?
I disagree with Mr. Cao because, first of all, he supports the former President Trump. I asked him personally if he accepts the result of the 2020 election, and he said he thought that it was a fraud. And he said that there were some issues with that election. And he said that the immigrants, the undocumented immigrants had come in and voted for President Biden. So he was spreading the propaganda of the former President Trump of the big lie. And they thought for a U.S. representative, if he was for the big lie, he's unfit to represent me.
Okay, Jeannie, as an independent, last year, who did you vote for governor in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin or Terry McAuliffe?
I actually voted for Terry McAuliffe because I think Glenn Youngkin had twisted what happened in the education board of Virginia. I think Virginia, and especially Fairfax, has a very high standard education board. And we are always leading the nation, even with Thomas Jefferson and many other schools in Fairfax County where I lived with education. But I think Youngkin had twisted the discussions and the situations in the education board. And he also had linked that with Merrick Garland. He twisted what Attorney General Merrick Garland had tried to protect the educational board of the county So I don't think he was very honest. I cannot trust a leader that is not honest and does not value the fact and the truth.
Now, Jeannie, is it a fair statement to say that most Vietnamese Americans tend toward the GOP?
It is not fair. That is why I want to talk to you today, to say that even though a small portion of all Vietnamese Americans lean toward the GOP, they do not represent Vietnamese Americans, because you know it, and I hope everybody knows it, that Vietnamese Americans came here to the U.S. after the Vietnam War, and we flee the communists because we detest, we do not want to live under communism. We do not want to be under one party, one rule, and the dictatorship. And that is why we're seeking freedom and democracy. So it's unfair to say that the Vietnamese Americans are all under one.
All right. Jeannie, thank you for your time this evening. Peyton's out in Iowa, Martell, Iowa, Republican. Peyton, is Chuck Grassley going to win re-election out there as senator?
I really think so. I think he's got a strong base all across Iowa, and his whole career and service. I just don't see a way that he loses tonight.
And I know that it was talked about as maybe a tougher race for Senator Grassley than in the past because the retired admiral was running against him, and perhaps because of his age as well.
Yeah, I think his opponent, I think he's a really interesting candidate for the Democrat Party. Way more libertarian than a lot of people are used to in Iowa. I don't know, that might attract some youth or not. I'm from the University of Iowa. I'm a freshman. It's my first time voting, so that was a cool experience. And a lot of people don't really like how old Grassley's getting. I think he's still a fighter, though. I really do. I think a lot of rural Iowans that grew up, on the farms and around agriculture, they see what he's been doing in his career.
Now, Peyton, you're at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, but where are you from originally?
So I'm from Martell, Iowa. I went to Anamosa High School, so it's a little different in Iowa City this year than my rural community.
All right. Who is your representative in Iowa City? Do you know that, or in Martell, Iowa?
So in Martell, it's Ashley Hinson, and then currently it's Marionette Miller Meeks, and we all remember that election last year. That was 10 votes.
6 votes, right? Yeah, something like that. So
something crazy.
All right. Peyton, thanks for watching. Thanks for calling in from the University of Iowa. It's nice to chat with you. Greta Bronner, what do you have for us?
Our viewers know about the redistricting that happened after the 2020 census and how that favored Republicans. And what ended up happening in this election cycle is that you have a couple of races where there's an incumbent versus an incumbent. Now, this happened more during the primary season, and you saw incumbents lose in the primary season. But one of the races tonight where there's incumbent versus incumbent is in Florida's 2nd district, where you have the Republican Neil Dunn versus the Democratic candidate Al Lawson. Now, Al Lawson won this northern Florida seat back in 2016. He fails to keep it tonight. The winner is Neil Dunn. And according to the Tallahassee Democrat, it's because of lower than expected turnout in Democratic strong counties like Tallahassee and Gadsden County. So Neil Dunn, the Republican, will go to Congress in this term. Now, on the state of Florida and the Republican victories that you have seen and that you will continue to see tonight, Zach Anderson, who covers Florida politics for Gannett News, tweeted this out this afternoon. And he says, wow, Diaz, referring to the Florida Democratic chair, Mr. Diaz, he put out a memo saying national Democratic groups spent nearly $59 million in Florida in 2018 compared to just $1.4 million this year. The National Party pretty much abandoned the state, he reports.
Let's go back to your calls, and all evening we'll be giving you results. You can also see it at the ticker at the bottom of the screen and the balance of the power on the side of the screen. We'll be doing results and analysis and, most importantly, hearing your voice and hearing directly from the candidates live. Kevin is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, an independent. Kevin, did you vote for your current Congressman Jim Banks or somebody else?
I voted for the Libertarian candidate, mostly as a vote to represent my frustrations with both major political parties. Congressman Banks, as it's been known in the past and well known nationwide, has greater ambitions and aspiration for a leadership position should the Republicans, of course, take control of the House. And most significantly for me, my opposition to him had been and remains that he's a sycophant for Donald J. Trump. And Trump, incidentally, today, not surprisingly and certainly not unexpectedly, has once again raised the specter of unfair election processes taking place during this midterm, even before, of course, the polls have been closed in many states, including several battleground states out west that he already has accused election officials of conducting unfair elections. I don't want to say that democracy, the defense of it, stands at the forefront of my concerns, but what overall is my greatest concern as this election will at point be concluded is the fact that even with as highly contested as this was, both parties will emerge from this scenario still greatly divided on their points of view on major issues. And as a number of voters have expressed through opinion polls and exit polls today that I witnessed on television, our political parties remain being subservient to their own political interests and not willing to partake in an effort to find common ground and work on behalf of the American people.
Kevin, how do you feel about the election integrity of the voting systems that you used in Fort Wayne?
Well, first of all, I would say Indiana as a whole, and Fort Wayne certainly to be included in that picture. I don't think that we've posed any great difficulties in terms of irregularities or unfavorable voting patterns in terms of fraud being an issue. And I quite frankly think that reflecting upon the past in 2020, and even as we look upon eventually the results to be brought forward in this midterm, there again, as I said earlier, Donald Trump continues to perpetuate the big lie.